Hello and welcome to Frontrunner Motorsport, and today was the final round of Formula 1 for 2024, the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. We are done and over. That's, I think it was 783 Grand Prix this year. Certainly feels like it. This was a pretty dull race, which Yas Marinas always is. It's a crap circuit. I've always hated Yas Marinas. Same as Qatar, it's a featureless wasteland. Never ever been a fan. But things did happen. And I think firstly we'll go through Max Verstappen's many mishaps. Well, there's two. Because the first corner incident where he made contact with Oscar Piastri, he should have backed out. It was a silly move to make that early in the race. I honestly think he would have been able to challenge Norris for the win here. If it was necessary, which it wasn't. But he spun. Piastri spun. They both ended up getting penalties for various reasons. Verstappen coming on the radio and saying the stewards are idiots. That stuff kind of blows up in your face all the time. And I don't know if he'll be punished for it. I'm guessing he'll probably get a reprimand. He'll definitely get a talking to, possibly a spanking. Because it's the same in football. You can't insult the referee. You shouldn't insult the race stewards. If you have an issue, save it till after the race and discuss it in private. Don't do it on the radio, which you know is going to get broadcast. It's very silly. And there's no forgiving it, really. It's not like... The stewarding in this race was very heavy-handed, but at the same time, I don't think they really got anything wrong. I think Piastri making contact with Colapinto, unfortunate, but Colapinto did get a puncture. And it did ruin his race, so I think Piastri getting a 10-second penalty for that is fair. And by that same token, Verstappen ruining Piastri's race deserved a 10-second penalty, and it was completely fair. That wasn't the only collision on the first lap. Sergio Perez got turned around by Valtteri Bottas, who also got a 10-second penalty. So the stewarding was very, very fair. It was very consistent, at least, which in the past it hasn't been. I don't think there's any problems with the stewarding. I think Verstappen is going to get in trouble for saying things like that. He should probably watch what he says to a degree. I think something like that, if he really had a problem with it, and Red Bull had a problem with it, and they couldn't talk Verstappen out of it, they could have taken it up with the stewards after the race. No harm. I'm sure they'd be happy to discuss why, and it could just be left at that. It's the end of the season. Nothing changes for Verstappen. He's still the champion. Doesn't matter. So just to make a big deal out of it for no reason is only hurting himself. There has been a lot of petty squabbling in Formula 1 this last week. Verstappen and Russell going back and forth. And of course Toto Wolff and Christian Horner had to get involved as well. They're all children. It's all pathetic. It's all playground stuff. Like Verstappen calling Russell a backstabber and a liar. Russell saying Verstappen threatened him. Toto Wolff calling Horner a yappy little terrier. And Horner has been in Wolff's head for a very long time. And it is kind of funny whenever Wolff loses his temper and starts spouting stuff like this. It is incredibly childish and pointless. Honestly, I don't have a lot of respect for pretty much anyone involved. Maybe Verstappen and Russell. I certainly don't have that much respect for Horner or Wolff. And so therefore I can't lose respect for them, but I can still just question why they are multi-millionaires with very good jobs that I could obviously do better. It's very frustrating for me. On to the race itself. Red Bull, obviously, it was a disaster, but Max Verstappen did regain places to 6th. He finishes off his championship with a really big lead. No issues for him whatsoever. Sergio Perez, it's very sad to see him crash on the first lap of what will most likely be his final Grand Prix ever. I'm not ruling out a return, but it's still up in the air. He has a contract for next year with Red Bull. Perez has said he's certain he's going to be driving that car in 2025. What Horner has said in the press suggests otherwise. But I think it's going to cost money to get Sergio Perez out of that seat. And Red Bull should never have given him another contract. That was a big mistake. He has been terrible this year. Very, very, very low class driving. Very poor standards. And honestly, the last 2 races he hasn't finished. There's been quite a few races he hasn't finished. He's crashed in qualifying a few times. He's qualified badly as well. And it's been a very poor season for the Mexican. I absolutely think they should replace him, but again, it comes down to money, the cost of paying off the rest of his contract. Maybe he'll take a reserve role. It's hard to know, but I think this will be the end for Sergio Perez. Lando Norris took the final win of the year, which was great for McLaren because it helps them to their first Constructors' Championship since 1998. I was 8 years old the last time McLaren won the championship. Brilliant drive for Lando Norris, completely controlled and dominated the race. He was quick in qualifying, quick in the race, brilliant drive. He's a brilliant driver, and he's had a fantastic year. 4 wins, second in the championship, and he's helped McLaren to the Constructors. What more can you ask for? It's absolutely fantastic. Piastri has had a good year. Obviously, this race did not go his way. He qualified second but got turned around. He did get up to 10th and scoring a point, but it didn't really matter anyway. But Piastri has been a revelation this year. Also taking his first wins, he has been great as well. McLaren really have the most exciting driver lineup for the future, I think. Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri are still very young, so there's still plenty of time for them to win championships, and I think honestly they're both good enough that they could. Ferrari, unlucky to miss out on that Constructors win. Carlos Sainz bows out with a second place, and again, he was there the whole time. Fantastic job from him. Charles Leclerc, mega job coming up through the field from 19th to 3rd. He was like 8th on the first lap. He was absolutely storming. Great moves around the outside as well. He avoided trouble. It was just the ultimate start from Leclerc. He's a brilliant driver, and another one who I would say you can think of him as another future potential champion. He's also still quite young, so the future of Formula 1 is in good hands. But his teammate next year is Lewis Hamilton, who did not have the best weekend. Bad qualifying in 16th, but he did work it back up to 4th. I think this is quite a sad way for him to end his Mercedes career after so much success. It's been the worst year ever for Hamilton in racing. He's never finished 7th in the championship before. Never finished that low in any championship, going back even to Formula Renault days. The last time he finished this low in the championship would have been back in his karting days. I think I did have a look, and I think it was like 2001 or something like that. It was a long, long time ago. And he's taken a couple of wins, but his bowing out with Mercedes like this, I'm sure it's very disappointing for him and Mercedes. But honestly, this is about his level now. I don't think him going to Ferrari is going to make him a championship contender next year. I honestly think he'll be around this 6th, 7th place, maybe a little bit high, maybe 4th or 5th. But I don't see him being a contender for the championship. He might take a win or two for Ferrari, but he's not going to be a raving success. Whereas George Russell is leading Mercedes into the future. I still think them having Andrea Kimi Antonelli next year is a massive mistake. And Mercedes have been kind of going backwards anyway. But George Russell is capable of getting good results. We've seen that this year, but we've also seen the inconsistency. He makes mistakes. He's not as steady a hand as Hamilton has been throughout the entire time he's been with Mercedes. So I think Russell, who again is young, and you could probably put him on the same level as Leclerc and Norris. You don't know what's going to happen to him in the future. Could be bright. Alpine beat out Haas and RB in the Constructors. Pierre Gasly, another brilliant performance from him. We had the debut of Jack Doohan. Didn't really see him. He was very quiet in this race, but that was probably a good thing for your debut. He honestly kept out of trouble, so that is a result for him. He's got the first taste of the car. He's done pretty much what Esteban Ocon would have done anyway, so it's not a bad result for him. Alpine gets 6th in the Constructors, so they'll be very happy with that. Haas, very disappointed to miss out. We didn't miss out by much. Nico Hülkenberg was 8th. He was actually, I think, in the top 10 of the championship, which is a brilliant result from the German. For Haas have been, again, absolutely brilliant this year. They were a bit of a joke last year. In fact, the last few years, they've been the backmarker team, or one of the backmarker teams with Williams. This year, they've come on leaps and bounds, 7th in the Constructors. Gunther Steiner leaving was the best thing that ever happened to them. But Hülkenberg, again, doing them proud. It's a massive shame he's going to be leaving them for Sauber, because I think Haas could really do with someone like Hülkenberg to score points. I don't think Esteban Ocon is as consistent as Hülkenberg. But again, Ocon does get those odd results. He's taken a win, taken a few second places. So Hülkenberg has never done that. So it's hard to tell if Haas will be any better off next year. Ollie Behrman does look a talent though, so it's going to be interesting to see what Haas do in the next couple of years. Fernando Alonso, Aston Martin, 9th, they scored 2 points. Pretty much sums up their season. They're kind of stuck in the middle of everyone. Not quick enough to keep up with the top teams, but they have been keeping ahead of the teams behind them. That hasn't been true in the second half of the year. Aston Martin have dropped back. Lance Stroll hasn't scored points since Hungary, which was, back in June. It's been a bad run for him, but it's pretty much what you expect from Lance Stroll, to be honest. Alonso did fine. It was another good result for Aston Martin, for Alonso at least. And Alonso's really kept them alive and 5th in the Constructors, because Lance Stroll does not do much. Kevin Magnussen, I forgot to mention with Haas, he got turned around by Bottas, which ended Bottas's race. This is likely Bottas and Magnussen's last races. So that incident where they hit each other, Bottas hit Magnussen. So Bottas ended his final race with a crash, but Kevin Magnussen went in, put the softs on, and he set the fastest lap in what is probably his final ever race. So he's got at least a little memento to take home with him. Kick Sauber did not do very much in this race, though Zhou Guanyu was at least quiet, didn't hit anyone. He finished 13th. It was fine. Bottas bowing out with a DNF. I'm sure that's a very disappointing end for him, although I'm sure he'll be back with Mercedes next year as a reserve driver. RB, Yuki Tsunoda was again average around about the points, but just missing out. He finished 12th. Liam Lawson, he had engine issues right at the end, but he didn't have a great race anyway. It's a poor end to the season. They looked quick in qualifying, but the race just didn't work out for him. Finally, Williams as well. Colapinto retiring with engine problems in what is, at least for now, his last race, but I do think he has given a good enough account of himself that he will be back. Hopefully one day, probably in the next couple of years. I think he'd be a good match for Andretti's entry into the sport in 2026. Colapinto, they can at least sign him as not experienced but proven F1 driver. So I think honestly, if Andretti rocked up with Colapinto, I think that'd be a great signing. Albon, he was just outside the points. It's been a tough year for him. He's scored points here and there. He's still been the best Williams driver, but it has been harder for him since Colapinto turned up. Logan Sargent never really posed a threat to Albon. But Albon you'll see again next year in that car with Carlos Sainz. That's going to be a much more interesting partnership to see if Albon can keep up. So that was the race. It's a strange end to the season because we had all this build-up for Ferrari versus McLaren. Ferrari never really looked like they were going to beat McLaren here. Lando Norris did such a good job of controlling the race. Carlos Sainz couldn't get close to him. It was kind of, unless Lando Norris was going to break down, it just didn't look like McLaren were going to lose. So we didn't really get that fight. Same with the Alpine Haas RB. Gasly had it well in hand in 7th ahead of Hulkenberg. It never really looked like he was going to drop behind him. And the RBs never really were a threat. So it never really looked like that was going to change. In that case, it was a big risk putting Jack Doohan in that car when that was on the line. But I think Gasly, he's a great team leader. I think that's going to be great for Jack Doohan next year to be learning from him. And I honestly think Alpine will be doing okay. It's a shame we're going to get rid of the Renault engines and take Mercedes because it's one less manufacturer producing engines on the grid. But for them, it probably is better because the Renault engines have never been good enough. Never had the pace. They will always be a midfield team with those engines. So it'll be interesting to see what they do when they get rid of them. A lot of drivers leaving, of course. We probably saying goodbye to Sergio Perez. We are saying goodbye to Valtteri Bottas. Magnussen is going. Zhou Guanyu hopefully will be back one day, along with Franco Colapinto. Of course, Lewis Hamilton is moving teams to Ferrari next year. Carlos Sainz is going to Williams. There's a few mix-ups around. Nico Hulkenberg is going to Sauber. Haas have got Ocon for next year. But otherwise, there's a few drivers we're saying goodbye to. It's always a shame. Bottas and Perez have had really good careers. They've taken wins in Formula 1. They haven't been champions. They've always really been the second drivers in the teams, the top teams they've driven for. Sergio Perez obviously had a bad time at McLaren years and years ago now. Bottas obviously was Hamilton's teammate at Mercedes. He took 10 wins. But they've both had really good careers. Magnussen, I think, has always been unlucky. When he returned with Haas replacing Mazepin, and he was really quick. I thought this could be a big turnaround for him and Haas. It's never really worked out like that, and since Hulkenberg turned up, it's been very one-sided in favour of Hulkenberg taking points. So I think Magnussen could see the writing on the wall. I believe he's going to be driving for BMW in the World Endurance Championship next year, which is very interesting because I really felt that BMW were coming on strong towards the end of the year, and I think he could find some success with them. But it's still a shame to see him leave Formula One because he was a guy who rocked up and got a podium on his debut, and his career never really hit that high ever again, which is kind of a shame. Zhou Guanyu, I think, is one of the best untapped potentials on the grid. Really think he deserves a seat for next year. I think it's abysmal that he hasn't got one. But hopefully we do see the Chinese driver again, because he is really good, and he's not had the car underneath him to show it. Franco Colapinto, it was always going to be a part-time gig, and he's given a good account of himself, even with the big accidents. I think he's ruled himself out of a Red Bull seat because of that, but I still think he is worth picking up for someone. And if someone doesn't perform next year, they've got Franco Colapinto waiting in the rings to take over. So I think that's going to put a lot of people on edge, having drivers like him, and also the likes of Felipe Drugovich and others on the sidelines waiting to have their opportunity. I think it's going to be a very, very interesting 2025 with quite a few debutants. Oliver Behrman coming in, Andrea Kimi Antonelli, Gabriel Bortoletto. You've got Jack Doohan, who's only done one race. It's going to be a very interesting grid next year. Hamilton at Ferrari, we don't know how that's going to work out. We don't know if Red Bull are going to have this lineup. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. It starts again in about 3 months, which doesn't seem like a very long time. But if there is any news from Formula One in that time, I will cover it on this channel. It is going to be a very interesting 2025. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. I'll be covering news whenever it comes up. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good one.